The board's back in order. Item 4 on the agenda is the appointment of committee members and committee chairs and vice chairs for 2015 and 16. That's an action item. You've noticed that most of the, if not all of those leadership positions have remained the same in the hopes of building some capacity and continuity at the board level and different committees. So any questions or comments of those appointments? Jack, is there anything else that we need to state about that? Item 4, no, right? Item 4 is just straightforward action?
Right.
Yep. Entertain a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved and properly second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 5, before, as Ed's coming up, just as a information, we've changed the agenda slightly. So after lunch, we're going to have our fiduciary training from our fiduciary counsel, Reed Smith. We're going to do that immediately after lunch so that board members that have other commitments later in the day can be here for that training. So with that, Ed, Mr. Durman, turn it over to you.
Sure. The purpose of this item is to get some, secure some board direction to start another rulemaking process to amend existing regulations that the board adopted relating to penalties and interests that are charged to employers who report late to CalSTRS. There's a variety of penalties that are in place that are meant to encourage the employers to be timely in the remittance of contributions and the reporting of compensation. And if they fail to meet those timelines, then there are penalties and interest applied to offset some of the opportunity costs associated with those late reports or the cost of the late reporting. And I will say as an aside that those penalties and assessments have been quite successful in changing the behavior of the employer. One of the penalties that's in place is relates to reports of compensation that's particularly late that affects our ability to collect contributions from the state. The state makes a contribution to the DB program based on the compensation that was reported to us for service that was performed 2 years prior to the fiscal year in which the contribution is paid. And if the employer reports to us on a timely basis, we report that information to the Department of Finance and to the legislature, and it's incorporated in the calculation of the appropriation that's made by the state for us. But if the compensation is reported to us after March 1st following that fiscal year, then under the law, it doesn't get reflected in the contribution that the state makes, and it's never collected. So the DB program is losing that contribution that the state would have paid us if the employer had reported on a timely basis. So right now, there's a penalty that's meant to approximate the lost contributions the state would make. But given the enactment of AB 1469 last year that fully funds the program, the state's contribution rate is going to be going up over the next few years. So what the purpose of this regulation is to amend the regulations so that the penalty that the employers pay when they are what we call extraordinarily late in their reporting would reflect the contribution rate that the state is paying. So we would be largely made whole for the late reporting by the employer. We've had discussions with the stakeholders. We've gotten some comments from the Department of Finance. Nobody expressed any concerns with that. This would, if the board tells us to go forward with it, we would start the rulemaking process and submit it to the Office of Administrative Law and begin that process. The other issue is associated with, as any rulemaking process is, after we've done that and there's a 45-day comment period, then the first decision is whether or not you want to conduct a hearing. If nobody asks for a hearing, in the past you've always conducted a hearing, which is certainly fine. And then if you do conduct a hearing, whether or not you want to conduct a hearing or, as you've done in some cases, sort of delegate that responsibility to Jack as the CEO. So the three decisions that you need to make is, number one, give us direction to initiate the rulemaking process. Number two, if nobody asks for a hearing, do you want to conduct a hearing on this? You always have, but it's a decision that you have to make. And number three, if a hearing is conducted, whether or not you would conduct that hearing, which we would incorporate within a normal board meeting, or you want to delegate that to Jack. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chung?
Okay.
Ed?
How much have we lost in contributions in the past because of this practice?
You know, I'd have to go back and look to see. I mean, given the regulations, we would. I mean, they exist now under the old contribution rate. We would have lost very little because they would have been compensating us for the lost contributions. In terms of what we lost before that, I'd have to go back and see. It's not a tremendous amount of money, but it's clearly something that if the employer who's responsible for it didn't pay it, either all employers going to end up paying it or the state's going to end up paying it in higher contributions than they otherwise would. So we're trying to assign that responsibility to the right employer. So maybe Robin has some information on that.
Robin Madsen, CFO. I don't have the detailed explanation, but it was in the millions of dollars when this change in law was enacted around 2011. So it was in the $4 or $5 million range over the course of several years. We are recovering that in proportion to still the late reporting. Late reporting has gone down with the enactment of penalty and interest regulations, which is our goal. We want zero penalties and interest. So we've seen a decline in that, but we're still recovering money through this process.
And do you see the same districts engaged in that same pattern, or is it
I don't
random?
see repetitive patterns that are not associated with an event. So, for example, there might be a change in payroll system that causes a delay. We had that with a particularly large district for a period of time. We have had other large districts go through payroll conversions where we've seen late reporting. But it's not like there are entities that are consistently late for non-circumstantial reasons.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions or comments, entertain a motion to, one, take a direction to either conduct a hearing or not have a hearing, and whether or not we want to delegate to the CEO. Preference?
Ms. Shi is recommending we delegate to our CEO and I assume to hold a hearing and whether or not anyone shows. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And
Thanks,
I'm
Mr.
assuming that also includes that we will proceed with the rulemaking process
Yeah,
too.
yes. that's-
Okay,
yeah, that's-
just want to be sure.
that's a
Okay.
safe assumption. Thanks, Ed. Fiduciary Insurance Board Policy and Coverage Limits, an item we've discussed on numerous occasions before, and I believe we have some recommendations and hopefully some actions today. I want to thank everyone who's worked on this issue at the board level, and staff and consulting level, and I think we'll be I'm hopeful that at the end of this item, we'll be in a more comfortable place for all of us. Turn it over to staff and Mr. Liederman and Ms. Cohen. And
Yeah, good
Gabor, how
morning.
do you pronounce your last name?
Gabor Moros.
Moros. Mr. Moros, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. You may remember that in the April board meeting, we had a presentation about fiduciary insurance. And there were two items coming off of that discussion. One, there was a proposition that the board policy should be amended to be broadened to provide the advancement of a cost of defense if a claim is received. So one item that is before you is an amendment to the board policy. It was drafted by Fiduciary Counsel Liederman and General Counsel Bartow. And the other, the lengthier discussion was about the variety of insurance that is available. And Aon, our broker, explained everything. We were deducing ideas from your discussion. And based on that, Aon went out, marketed the need for our fiduciary insurance. You also instructed us to try to narrow the available policies and consult with Mr. Rosenstiel. So we did that, and he helped us to narrow the field. So what you will see today as the proposal is the result of that combined effort. And Michelle Kahn from Aon will explain what is available. Fiduciary Counsel will provide his advice on it. So you have two items, and at the end, we would like to get two action items.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you.
Could you make sure your mics are on, please? Thanks.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
So what you have before you on the slide here are two program options. So I'll just go through each one separately and explain the differences, and then we can go through questions if you have any then. So when we met last time, we talked about fiduciary liability coverage and what's encompassed within a traditional fiduciary liability program, which is what you are currently purchasing. It's a combination of coverage for individuals where they're not indemnified by CalSTRS or any other source, shared with limit for loss of individuals, which is indemnified by CalSTRS, and loss of CalSTRS and the plans itself. All of that type of coverage is contained within one policy, which is your traditional fiduciary liability coverage. So as you look at the option on the left, that is what you're going to see there. Any one of those types of claims can erode the limit. And the claims against the entities, so CalSTRS or the plans, would be subject to a retention of $25 million. Claims against individuals where they are not indemnified would be subject to a zero retention under that program. So the option one on the left is essentially mirroring the type of coverage that you're currently purchasing. And we're pleased to report we were able to make significant reduction in the premium this year, about $300,042 year over year on the total cost of the program for $75 million in limit. So that's option one. Option two contains the special type of coverage that we discussed last time, which is dedicated non-indemnifiable loss coverage for individuals. So that type of coverage, which is the green box on top, is coverage which would only cover individuals where they're not indemnified by CalSTRS or the plans. And that type of coverage cannot be eroded by a claim against the company. So while you have non-indemnifiable loss protection in the first $75 million of your tower, you have an additional $25 million in option two, which is dedicated to individuals. So if you had a claim against CalSTRS that eroded your first $75 million, you would still have $25 million available for the individual directors and officers to protect you. That's subject to a zero retention. That policy also has some special features which enable it to drop down and replace, for example, an underlying carrier if that carrier were to go insolvent and it was a non-indemnifiable loss claim, or if there's simply a refusal to indemnify an individual where that indemnification is required. That policy on top would actually come down and indemnify the individuals until such time as the indemnification question was worked out. Okay. So total cost for that program, $695, $631. That still represents $197,217 cost reduction year over year, about 22.09% year over year, inclusive of the additional limits. So, are there any questions about the differences between option one and two that I could answer?
Mr. Boykin.
So on option two, the piece that sits on top, is that because it attaches at a much higher point? Do we get to recognize that in terms of a lower premium?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
So definitely a lower rate per million for that coverage. It's slightly more expensive than the very top layer of your traditional because it has those drop-down features, which are additional coverage points where they would be required to respond.
Thank you.
Mr. Unterman?
I just want to confirm two things about our both CalSTRS indemnification for trustees and then in the policies. First, in the policies, that there is a provision for mandatory advancement of expenses in the event of a claim. And then the CalSTRS policy, as I remember, is permissive, not mandatory, but the standards are such that in almost all cases, indemnity would be granted. Is that correct?
Yes.
So first on
I
advancement.
can respond on the coverage piece
Yeah.
and then Harvey. we can talk about the CalSTRS indemnification provisions. So a couple things within your policy. So number one, this side A difference in conditions coverage on the top here will drop down and indemnify from the first dollar in the event there's a failure to indemnify. So if there's a refusal, if there's a failure, something goes wrong with the indemnification from an insurance perspective down below, that policy is intended to drop down and protect the individual. So it is a mandatory advancement provision.
I get
Okay.
that part. The question is the advancing expenses at the outset before determination of indemnification and all that
That's
stuff.
correct.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
So the difference is on the lower policy, there's a presumption that if indemnification can be provided pursuant to the indemnification provisions, that it will be provided and that the retention will apply to that type of loss. So on the underlying program, there's a question whether the retention applies or doesn't apply that can affect, how the coverage performs. One additional amendment we made this year, which is for the protection of all the individuals covered under the policy, is we actually negotiated a term with the underlying carriers that said if there's a failure or refusal to indemnify, the insurance will advance the defense costs within the retention, and then they have the right to go back after CalSTRS for the amount of that retention if it is in fact an indemnifiable loss. But it does protect the individuals and will advance defense costs.
If I may, the purpose of the policy manual change is to address exactly that issue, that if there's any doubt that the individuals and board members, staff, or whoever is an indemnified person, that when a claim is made, that until that's processed, there's no doubt that the money is advanced either by CalPERS or under the policy, but that there isn't confusion or an uncertainty, that the risk of uncertainty has been shifted either to the entity or to the third-party insurer on that. So they work in tandem together that way.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Back to you, Ms. Gill.
So we had one other page, and we don't need to go through each one of these provisions, but just wanted to highlight the fact that we made significant improvements to the coverage on the fiduciary liability program. Over 60 coverage enhancements were negotiated on the underlying program alone. And there's a list here of some of the highlights. That first one on the list is what we were just talking about, the advancement of defense expenses within the retention where there's a failure or refusal to indemnify. So that's a significant improvement over what the policy was providing previously. And then there are a number of other provisions, obviously, that are included here. I'm happy to go through each one if you would like, or you could just read through it and ask any questions that you have.
I think the waiver of recourse is
Okay,
in
we'll
the
highlight
interest
that
of the
one.
board member.
Great. So we talked about waiver of recourse last time, and the small portion of the premium that individuals pay in order to have a waiver of the recourse that the insurer would normally have against them if they paid out money that they weren't entitled to. And the way so there has to be a recourse provision pursuant to the statute in the insurance policy, but you can get it waived if you pay a portion of the premium yourself, where the premium's not all paid out of plan assets. So what we were talking about last time is clarifying the wording with respect to directors or officers who retire and are no longer part of CalSTRS, may have paid the waiver of recourse at the time they were there, but they're no longer there when the claim actually comes in, maybe a year or two later. So we did negotiate wording on the policy that basically says if a director or officer retires or is no longer an insured during the policy period or a previous policy period, the waiver of recourse will continue to apply to that person for the rest of the policy period and then in subsequent policy periods. So it's a clarification of what the intent was all along from the insurer's perspective, but I think will provide that the clarity and the exact, how do I say this? The certainty that it's not going to go away once you're gone.
We're going to call this the board member Zeiger endorsement in honor of what we heard earlier this morning. And that's exactly the example of when that it needs to be clarified. 3 years from now, if somebody were to bring a fiduciary lawsuit against the board and members arising out of things that happened in May of 2015, he needs to know that his waiver of recourse is still in effect and that it hasn't burned off because the policy is in another phase. So that's the purpose of that amendment, just further protection for everybody on the board and staff who's covered.
Thanks for that clarification. Critically important. Mr. Rosenstiel?
Well, I would like to make a motion if it's.
Great.
For time to do that, because I think this is great. I did have the opportunity to work with Michelle and Kabor and Harvey, and they all three did a fantastic job, and I think we've got before us a much better policy than we've had in the past. Addresses a lot of the issues that we had some concerns about with respect to, you know, what happens if there's a question about whether indemnification is available, advancement of legal fees right away, waiver of recourse, all those things. I think we've gotten some clarity and some improvement. So I don't know if I can I make a motion for both? We have two things.
Yeah, I don't see there's any objection to that.
To make a motion that we adopt resolution to utilize this insurance proposal, the second one, the one that includes the side A, and make a change in our policies as outlined in the agenda materials. So I move those two.
Great. Moved by Mr. Rosenstiel, seconded by Ms. Dillon.
Sure.
Any discussion? Any discussion, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really good. I know. Yeah. So much.
Item 7 on our agenda,
And she.
federal legislation and board positions. Marianne Ashley. Good morning, Ms. Ashley.
So on the agenda today, we had 3 bills listed for the board to review and adopt positions on. However, AB 996 has been held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. We do anticipate, it's now a 2-year bill, we do anticipate that there will be more amendments made to the bill. We would like to continue to work with CTA and other impacted stakeholders on the amendments and then bring it back to the board for review once the amendments have been made and we have a clearer idea of what the bill would do. Then for HR 711, it's a federal bill. It's the Equal Treatment of Public Servants Act. It establishes a new formula for the treatment of non-covered earnings and determining Social Security benefits to replace the WEP. For individuals who turn age 62 after 2016 and become eligible for benefits and have also earnings derived from non-covered service performed after 1977. While the bill does not repeal the WEP, it provides for a more equitable formula based on actual earnings. For those who turn age 62 and are eligible for benefits prior to 2017, the current WEP will continue to apply. For those under the current WEP, the bill does include provisions that will lessen the effects of the WEP via a rebate in the form of a reduction to the WEP offset. The rebate would be a percentage based on a calculation by the Chief Actuary of Social Security, and the rebate would be calculated so that the overall net program cost effect of the provisions of the bill would be cost neutral. The new formula, as I mentioned, would apply to those who turn age 62 after 2016, and it would use the standard benefit formula that's used to determine Social Security benefits as if all the workers' earnings were subject to Social Security taxes, and then it would multiply that amount by the percentage of earnings that were covered by Social Security to ensure that the Social Security benefits are based only on the Social Security wages. The measure expands the applicability of the new formula to all Social Security recipients who perform non-covered service, regardless if they vest and qualify for an ongoing benefit as a result of that non-covered service, and thus it expands the affected population. This means that any member who works in a CalSTRS covered position but does not vest in CalSTRS and receives a Social Security benefit would be subject to the new formula. The bill mandates enforcement of the current WEP for individuals who are already 62 as of 2016, and it directs the Commissioner of Social Security to recover overpayments from certain individuals. Social Security would be required to obtain from all employers who paid non-covered wages after 1977 to a worker not currently subject to the WEP certification that the person has not received any periodic payments as a result of their non-covered employment. And if satisfactory certification was not provided, then the individual would be subject to the WEP. There will be some individuals who benefit from the provisions of the bill and some that do not. Staff is recommending a support position as overall the bill will lessen the effects of the WEP for current beneficiaries and will ensure that Social Security benefits for those under the new formula are based only on Social Security wages. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Could you just add some political context to that? I mean, clearly, year after year, bills have been introduced to eliminate the windfall elimination and the GPO, which is the desire of our membership to eliminate it entirely. Those bills get introduced, they usually get a lot of co-sponsors, but they don't make progress in Congress because of the fiscal impact. So again, I just want to underscore that this is an attempt by some parties to come up with an idea that does not have fiscal impact. So there have to be winners and losers in that concept in this bill. So just highlight that this is a very different bill than the normal bills. In fact, you've got another one on the plate here, the more traditional bill to react to. But this was the frustration of many of the groups of feeling no progress was made in Congress. So how could we come up with a bill that is neutral on fiscal impact? So very different.
Ms. Gillen?
Aaron, I just want to make sure that I understand. The new formula will affect those that are under age 62 in 2016. So anyone that retires between, let's say, 63 in 2016 doesn't get the new formula. Correct? Because you had to be under age 62 in 2016 if it passes.
The new
So if you were 63 in 2016, you're not going to be eligible for the new formula. But it does say in the recommendation that there's a rebate in the form of a reduction to the offset, which provides relief from the effects on current retirees. So is there going to be a population between those that are under 62 in 2016 and those currently retired that won't see the rebate and then don't get the new formula?
I think it's meant that they'd be in either the current WEP or the new formula.
So everyone is going to see some sort of relief, either through the new formula or for being currently retired.
Correct.
Thank you.
Or a penalty.
Pardon?
Or a penalty if they didn't have before. I mean,
some will
get relief, some will get penalized.
Okay, so explain that to me then.
Well, in that chart that they have, the item. Oh, sorry, thank you. I mean, there's two sides to the penalty. On the chart on page 43,
Yes.
you'll see in red that under that computation, those that are highly, if you want to say highly pensioned, I don't know what the right term there is actually a decrease, a net decrease Again, this
You
helps
get
on the.
hit- yeah, yeah,
And then, of course, you're exposing hundreds of thousands of inactives to the penalty. So it all has to balance out somehow, as designed by these advocates. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Is that it, Dana?
Yes.
Ms. Hendricks?
I think that was sort of, I guess, my question as well is, do we have an approximate sense of how many inactive members do we have? Ed, Marianne? I guess I'd just like to get a little bit more understanding of the folks that are negatively impacted, how many that is, and
Yeah, Brian just caught it. It's right there on page 43. Underneath the chart, it says, as of June 30th, there are 146,471 inactive, non-vested members. I don't think we have a number on the other aspect of it.
so those would be like part-timers that have just been teaching one class over a long period of time, or what?
No, not all.
No, I'm talking, so, give me examples of what are inactive
All the
members.
people that are not vested, that don't make it to 5 years, that leave their accounts with us. I mean,
Right,
it's
but
a
that-
huge body of workers.
That is, okay, go ahead, Ed. You-
Oh, Mr. Derwin,
Did
do you
you
want
wanna-
to?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I would think it's principally, because they're inactive members, they have quit teaching. So it's probably people who started teaching and may have gone on leave for one reason or another, or decided to not continue teaching, but left the money with us.
Okay.
Any other?
So historically, and this doesn't go with the bill, maybe this is more better discussed in benefits and services. So we have a chunk of former members that have left their monies with us. I imagine that we've kept track, or we have track somehow, of those members that actually, because if they're not vested, they get their money back, correct?
They can get their money back with a little bit of interest.
So, I guess I'm kind of curious, how many just have left it in and have totally forgotten about it? Or are waiting until they're retired just to get more money back? How many people actually pull their money back?
If they never vested there, then there's no advantage to waiting till they're ready to retire, because they're not going to get a retirement benefit from us. They're just going to get, a small amount of continuing interest.
But we have 146,000.
Right,
back to work.
and yeah, but a lot of them may be anticipating coming back to work at some point. They may be, they may have left the family or left teaching to raise a family for a period of years, and they're coming back. And we do have a lot of people who do refunds, and under federal law, they have to, if they've stopped working when they reach 70 and a half, they have to get the money back.
Right.
So we get contact with them. So at the very least, that's going to happen. That that at least by 70 and a half, they will have taken the money back if they're not working. In this
Yeah, Dana, I
environment.
was going to say the same thing as Brian did. Actually, in Colorado, we actually had an inactive member newsletter. I mean, because it was a customer base that we needed to keep
Yeah,
educating.
yeah.
So we actually I think I heard you say maybe former members. They're actually members of the system, just like anyone else. It's just that they are
They're
not.
inactive members,
It's just that they're not vested
Former
potential.
teachers maybe, or whatever.
Yeah.
And they do
yeah.
get an annual report from us, so that we do
So
inform.
they should be aware that they've not, okay.
If they
That's what I
go
was
online
curious
and look
about.
at it,
It's a
yes.
topic on,
It's not like they've
worthy of
left
discussion.
teaching and forgotten they had this money sitting there. Thank you.
Just a question on that. If someone just drops off the radar screen entirely and the account is inactive, over some period of time, does it as cheat to the state, or?
No.
There are some states, Colorado actually issues to the treasurers, but not in California.
Mhm. So it can just sit there forever, and the actuarial, when the actual age becomes 70 and a half, and what happens if you can't find the person then? I mean, this is a detour, I'm sorry.
many people, all those things are going to happen.
Well, this is better benefits and services.
We do have those accounts, and we make an attempt to locate them, but we are in some cases unsuccessful in doing that, and we just keep the account, and it continues to accrue interest.
But the member is subject to substantial taxes.
Yeah,
If they don't take the money out when they're 70 and a half. which is their problem to deal with, not ours. But, I mean, there's a real incentive for them to get that money out because they'll have to pay, I think it's a 50% tax penalty or something like that.
Yeah, they're under the required minimum distribution rate.
Right.
So
I
we
guess
do
this
make,
is-
we are actively attempting
I
to
guess if you
contact
can't
them.
find the member, neither can the IRS, so.
I wouldn't be quite so sure of that.
So is it correct then that this is a bill that would basically help some of our members and hurt other of our members? And is there if that's the case, is there a rationale for why we should favor one group of our members over another group of our members and support this bill?
To that point, I'd like Mr. Lieberman, fiduciary counsel, maybe to weigh in. If you have an opinion or view relative to Mr. Rosensteel's question. In fact, want to identify yourself for the record.
Harvey Liederman, Reed Smith. That's a difficult fiduciary question. It's called Sophie's Choice.
That's why we're asking.
Usually it isn't that stark, but, you know, I don't have any problem with any issue with the board weighing in on this as part of your board policy manual to weigh pros and cons, and it's the featured item in the legislative section of the board policy manual dealing with this WEP penalty. However, you've got a bill that's been joined, the good news and the bad news with it. There's another bill which is just all good news. And so you could fashion a position of the board that doesn't harm those. In other words, you wouldn't support that portion of the bill unless it was amended to take the harm out, so you didn't have to make the Sophie's Choice in the situation. You know, ultimately, it's just going to be a judgment call. Does it work for the benefit that much more? The numbers, there's some red numbers on that chart that I see that talks about how much of the harm. So, I mean, you could look at it and say, well, how many people are going to be benefited by how much, and does that really materially outweigh the small amount of harm to a smaller number of people? But it's just a difficult judgment call to make. You can make that judgment call, but I think it would be more appropriate to weigh in and say, yeah, we're going to support, you know, column A on the bill, but not column B on the bill, and we'll support the other bill if you want to do that.
Just the nuance that Harvey and I talked about is just remember you're not making a decision relative to the benefits that you administer. So the analysis is a little bit different. And then the other thing I would point out again, as Harvey and I discussed, your board policy manual talks about legislation to repeal, and this isn't quite a repeal. This is sort of a half a loaf. So your legislative policy is not really clear that this is specifically addressed. That was the only other nuance I'd add.
Yeah, if you are uncomfortable with taking a support position, I guess I'd probably encourage you to take no position. Taking a position without the bad stuff is a little nuanced, because then it's really the other bill. This whole bill is premised on that type of fiscal arrangement. So to say you're going to take away the fiscal savings, then there isn't really a bill left to advance. So I would argue that probably just taking no position is probably a better place to be, and think about the other bill that's a little tighterly consistent with your policy.
Seeing no other questions, Ms. Ashley, do you have anything else you wanted to present? Is there another bill in your?
Did you want to vote on what position you'd like to adopt on this bill first before I move on? Or do you want me to present the other one?
Why don't we present the other ones and then we'll take them one by one.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. And before we do,
Mhm.
we have a member of the public that would like to address us.
Okay.
Mr. Folia.
Speaking for the CTA retirees, I'm glad that Jack finally came up with something that's sensible on this. We really, I'm not surprised. I think we should take a no position. We should never be putting one because of a bill that would fix half the problem at the expense of another part of the problem is not where we should be as an organization. And our NEA affiliate does not support this motion. You're not going to fix this. You're not going to fix this problem, which is really a very unjust problem, and is compounded because there's also a GPO aspect to the problem, which is addressed in the other bill. But it's not like, well, we want all good things. What we want to do is correct what has been done to us since 1985 that has been an injustice. And so what we're asking for you to do is to, at the very least, have no position on this and see if you can mitigate the problem so no one is hurt. But in essence, what I don't want to see Congress do is say, we fixed the problem. Oh, we passed that bill, we fixed the problem. Well, you didn't fix the problem because you have so many other things to deal with, like GPO and full WEP repeal. Now, if they want to have a bill that does it in transition and over a period of time that takes care of those two issues, then that's something that we should be looking at. But that's not what this bill is all about. And so I hope that we strongly go for a no position on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Folia. Back to you, Ms. Ashley.
HR 973 is the Social Security Fairness Act of 2015. And what this bill would do would be to repeal both the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. And as Jack mentioned earlier, just about in every session of Congress since 2001, a bill repealing or reforming the WEP and GPO has been introduced. However, none of them have moved forward. Similarly, in California, resolution to urge President and Congress to repeal the offsets has been repeatedly introduced, and the governor has signed them. And as you recall, this year, we have SJR 1 by Senator Bell, which urges repeal of both offsets, and it has moved from the Assembly to, or from the Senate to the Assembly, so it is moving forward. CalSTRS members represent the single largest group of state and local government employees in the country who do not participate in Social Security, and the offsets particularly impact educators who begin their career at a later age. Staff is recommending that the board support this measure, but also recommends considering other efforts to make appropriate adjustments to the offsets as an alternative to complete repeal. Part of the challenge is that this could lead to discussions of mandating Social Security for everyone and doing further Social Security reform that would be quite expensive. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Dillon?
So Marianne, are you asking us to consider efforts when new bills come up, or are you asking us to allow staff to have conversations with congressional representatives, encouraging them to do something short of full repeal? I'm just not quite sure what you mean by us considering efforts to make the appropriate adjustments.
Right, as other bills come forward that maybe have a different approach, because all the efforts to have total repeal have failed. They haven't moved forward. So as new ideas come up that would lessen the impact of the offsets,
You're going to be bringing those forward to us for consideration.
for the board to consider.
With that question answered, I recommend a support. Or I move support.
On this item, on this bill?
Yes.
Okay. So it's been moved by Ms. Dillon, seconded by Mr. Boykin, for the board to take a support position on HR 973, the Social Security Fairness Act of 2015. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yes. Okay, and may the record reflect that Ms. Ortega abstained from the vote, which will bring us back to AB 996, which was the first.
Well, that one we're just going to bring back at a later date because that one's now a 2-year bill. But HR 711, we do need the board.
HR 711 is the Equal Treatment of Public Servants Act of 2015. The recommendation is to take a support position. There was discussion for us to take a no position on it as well. Is there a recommendation by the committee? First we go to Ms. Dillon and then Ms. Hendricks. Ms. Dillon?
So, Marion, can you, what are our options again? We have support, we have disapprove, what all are our options?
You could actually not take a position at all, similar to what you did, the same as what you did for SB 185, the thermal coal divestment. So you could be neutral, you could do support if amended, oppose unless amended. So there's a variety of positions.
Do we have one that would have us monitoring it and allowing us still to note our concerns with the staff?
That would either be neutral or just not take a position. We will continue monitoring this measure.
I'm looking for one that actually allows us to express our concerns with the author, but not having a yes or a no.
That we could do.
Or do we have such a piece?
We don't, there's nothing in the existing policy that has that position, but you could take no position, but direct the staff to communicate with the appropriate staff in Washington about the concerns of the board.
Hey, you have a watch position, right?
No, we don't have a watch position. No. Yeah.
Dana, do you want to?
No, I'm waiting for this discussion of it.
Yeah, it's a special category watch. Indicates the measure does not directly affect our benefits, but addresses issues of concern to the board. The counselor staff with regard to inform the board and staff such measures. That's the watch.
Yeah, so we could, that might be more consistent.
Then I would
with what
like
you're
to
looking
move a watch position and ask staff to engage with the author of the bill about our concerns.
It's been properly moved for a substitute motion. The motion's been to direct staff, for the board to take a watch position and staff to communicate that with the author. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay, been seconded by Ms. Vargas. And Ms. Vargas, would you like to question? Sure.
So not only to speak to the author, but I think to our congressional delegation to really update them of what this really means. I mean, I think they probably already know, but to really continue to engage them so that they really understand that this is a something that we care about, and that not taking a position doesn't mean that just by watching it doesn't mean that we're not actually supporting or opposing, the work that they're doing. So I'm not sure if you need to amend it, but just so it's broader than that.
Yeah, I think the watch position is exactly that. We're directing staff to watch, monitor, communicate, coddle, rod, whatever's necessary to communicate the interest of our system to the appropriate congressional delegation as well as the author. So, is everyone okay with that? Okay. Seeing no other comments, questions, or discussions, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Ms. Ashley. Thank you very much. Which brings us to our next item. Mr. Dermott.
Yeah, this is the final action on the additional earnings credits for the defined benefit supplement and cash balance benefit program in response to the valuation as of June 30, 2013. At the last meeting, the board adopted a new policy with respect to awarding the earnings credits that were incorporated into the policy manual. Under the policy, additional annuity credits would not be awarded in the future because the annuities that they are receiving ought to reflect the assumed rate of return, and therefore the board determined that providing additional credits wasn't appropriate. And they also modified the threshold upon which additional earnings credits would be awarded based on the standard deviation of the program assets rather than the interest rate. So this would actually execute that new policy, and under the policy, for the 2013 year, the DBS program would get a additional earnings credit of 4.5%, and for participants in the cash balance program, get an additional earnings credit of 4%. This would still maintain a funded status in excess of 115% for both programs, so they still be well-funded, but the recommended additional earnings credit is consistent with the new board's policy, and we would recommend adoption of those credits.
Thank you, Mr. Derman. Seeing any questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Dillon.
Move staff's recommendation?
It's been moved by Dana to adopt the staff recommendation. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Hendricks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Very good. With that, I think we will adjourn for lunch. It's 12:25, and we'll come back at, 1 o'clock is okay? Everyone okay with 1, or we want to go to 1:15?
One's fine.
1 o'clock? Okay, see everyone at 1 o'clock. Thank you. We're adjourned.